guys, it's Alice, and today we're going to talk about the books I read in the last part of May. First up, we have got Przewalski's Hest by Maja Lunde. This was sent to me by the publishers. It's a fiction book, and in it we meet a zoologist in St. Petersburg in 1881. We meet a veterinarian in Mongolia in 1992, and then we meet a woman and her daughter who is living on this farm in 2064 in Norway, and they are just trying to survive. And all of these timelines have something in common, and that is this rare Mongolian horse breed. This was a very interesting and enjoyable read, and it is technically like a book in a series. This series is called Klimakvartetten. I don't really know what it's called in English, but the first book is The History of Bees and the second one is The End of the Ocean. These are very loosely related though. It's not like you really need to read them in order. There are some small things that sort of bind them together, but I feel like if you don't read them in order, it doesn't really matter that much. I really liked getting to know our characters in here and seeing their individual relationship with these horses and what these horses mean to them. And it was interesting to see how the animals were treated in all of these different timelines and seeing the species survive, even though I am personally not that interested in horses in general. I really like how dark this story feels most of the time, and seeing the different characters each go through their own trials. It was very interesting, and it never felt over dramatic to me, which can happen sometimes. It just felt like life. I think there's something interesting in all three timelines in this, but my favorite one was the middle one where we follow the veterinarian in Mongolia, because I think that character, she is so interesting. She's really complex and complicated, and seeing her relationship with her son was kind of painful but also beautiful, and I really liked the way that that relationship was explored. One thing that I did notice though was that in the perspective that's set in the future, I felt really desperate to know more about what the world looks like in this future. Like, a lot of stuff is alluded to and it's hinted at, but I just wish we had seen more of it. The whole perspective takes place on this farm and we don't really move away from that place at all, and I just wanted to know more. Like, I felt like I just wanted more from that particular perspective. I can't help but compare this book to the two other books in the series, and I feel like this sits somewhere in the middle of them. I think The History of Bees is the best one, and then we have this one, and then we have The End of the Ocean. And I was contemplating whether or not to give this 3 or 4 stars, but I've tipped the scale up to 4 stars because I really did enjoy it, and I do think it's a very interesting book. The second book that I read was The Dreamers by Karen Thompson Walker. This is like very light science fiction, and the story is set in this college town in Southern California where a mysterious sleeping sickness starts spreading. So this was an interesting book and I enjoyed it quite a lot, and I generally really like these types of books, like books that deal with some sort of mysterious illness in fiction, and it's especially interesting to read right now, I think. There's a lot of commentary in here about how society reacts to this kind of situation, and a lot of what happens in here resonates with things that have happened lately. There is something very compelling to the way this is written to me, and I just wanted to keep going with it. I wanted to know what was on the next page, and I love when you get into that kind of groove with a book. And there is a sort of eeriness to this and a strange vibe going on in it that I really, really liked. One thing I thought was really interesting in here, and I don't think I would have appreciated it the same if I had read this before the current epidemic that we're living in. There are these chapters in here where we get to read about how the outside world reacts to what is happening. And some of those chapters are like, they include a certain type of people, like conspiracy theories and things to do with the government and reactions to that. And I just thought that was really interesting, and I think I appreciated those chapters more because of the times that we're currently living in. That being said though, this book is told in third person, and even though we meet a lot of characters, to me it didn't really feel like we got to know them that well. This might just be a personal preference, but I really like getting to know the characters and getting inside of their heads, and I think the way this is written holds us a little bit at a distance, if that makes sense. And I think that because of that, it's hard to connect to the characters and it's hard to really get emotionally invested when something emotional happens. I just felt like we were held at a distance, and I didn't really like that. This is pretty close to a 4-star read for me, but I tipped the scale down to 3 because of the way I felt about the characters, and I think that the ending for me was maybe a little bit too ambiguous. I did really like it though. I don't really know if I would sort of recommend it to everyone. I think it's the kind of book that splits opinions a little bit, and if you don't like this, you're really not gonna like it, if that makes sense. But I thought it was interesting and worth a read. After that, I read The Puppet Show by M.W. Craven. This is a mystery/crime novel, and it's about this serial killer who is burning people alive inside of these stone circles in the Lake District, and disgraced detective Washington Poe is brought in to help with the investigation after his name is found carved into the bodies of one of the victims. This was pretty gruesome and a really dark book, and I very much enjoyed it. The whole story in here starts off with a bang, and I was immediately pulled in, and I was so curious as to what was going on. And it's written in a really readable way, and there's a lot of suspense in here, and it just makes you want to keep going. I liked getting to know our characters in here, but they are very stereotypical, I think. Like, we have the disgraced detective who is brought back in because he's so incredibly good at his job, and he will go to any length to get justice, even if it costs him his career. And then he teams up with this genius computer analyst who is really good at math, but she's like socially awkward and socially inept, I guess. And I don't know, I think that they just felt very stereotypical, and I think that the relationships between the characters in this book are also very stereotypical, and I would have loved for the characters to have been a little bit more complex and complicated, and I think that the relationships between them could have used some work. The mystery for me is the best part of this book, and I really liked reading about it. I loved how complicated it was, and I loved just getting to know what was going on. I did kind of figure out who had done it, but only like 20 pages before it was revealed, and even then I really enjoyed learning why it had been done. I do think that the reveal maybe dragged on for a little too long. It's like a pretty sizable chunk of the book is just a reveal, and there's a lot of information in that reveal, and some of it I feel like maybe we didn't need. So even though this didn't completely blow my mind, my reading enjoyment of it was so incredibly high, and it was high enough to make me want to read the next book in the series, and I gave it a 3 out of 5 stars. I think if you like police procedurals, you'll really like this, although just bear in mind it does get quite gruesome and it is kind of graphic. After that, I picked up The House Between Tides by Sarah Maine. This is like fiction/historical fiction, and the story is about this woman who returns to her ancestral home in Scotland after her last living relative has died, and when she's there, she discovers this skeleton on the estate, and she tries to find out who the skeleton is and what secrets lie in the past of her family. I don't have that much to say about this book, to be honest. I don't think it's a bad book, but it just didn't do it for me. Now, I picked this up because this is often compared to Kate Morton's books, and I understand the comparison, and I really enjoy Morton's books. I read a bunch of them, but it was before I started BookTube, and I find that those books are very easy to get lost in and they're just very enjoyable. But when I was like 100 pages into this, I just realized I wasn't enjoying it at all. There are some things that I do like about this book. I like the setting and I like the descriptions of nature and especially the bird life of this place. But otherwise, the plot and the characters were just kind of boring. The story is told through dual perspective, right? So we follow this woman in modern times who finds this skeleton, and then we follow a historical perspective. And the character set in modern times, honestly, she was so dull and uninteresting. And I thought that the historical perspective was a little bit better, but I wasn't super invested in that either. There is also a little bit of a mystery element in this with the skeleton, but by the time we got to read about what had happened with that, I was just like, oh, okay, so that's who it was. I just wasn't interested. It was just an okay book for me. It felt very forgettable, and I gave it a 2 out of 5 stars. I really don't think it's a bad book though, it just was not my jam. Second to last, I finished Sexing the Cherry by Jeanette Winterson. This is like magical realism / historical fiction, and in it we meet a woman in 17th century London who finds a child and raises him. And the story is about them and their journeys. So this went straight over my head, and honestly, I don't think I'm smart enough to get this because I just don't get it. This is my first book by Jeanette Winterson, and maybe I just started in the wrong place or something. I don't even know what to say about this. Like, there were some parts in here, like the writing was beautiful in some parts, but to me everything just felt very disjointed, and I think maybe it was just too abstract for me. This is clearly very creative and imaginative, but I think maybe it's just my personal preference to have things be more solid and more concrete, whereas in this, everything is just sort of up in the air. Everything is very fluid, like the characters and the setting and the time, and to me, I was so confused. I'm sure this is a fantastic book for the right reader, but I don't think that reader is me, so I gave it a 2 out of 5 stars. I do really want to try something else by Jeanette Winterson though. I have another 2 of her books, so I think I'm gonna try and read one of those, because I think if I can find the right story for me, I could make this work for me. If you have any recommendations for what to read though, let me know, because this was not it. Lastly, I finished This Is Not a Drill. This is an essay collection, and it's published by Extinction Rebellion, and all of the essays in here deal with climate change, and they're all by different people. This was a really interesting book, and I've really tried to take my time with this because there is a lot in here to think about. I like the diversity of the voices that we get to read from in this, and I think that all of them together create this overview of the problem, but we still get to remember the people and the human lives that are affected by this. And there were some essays in here that were absolutely jaw-dropping, I'm not gonna lie. I do think that because all of these essays are written by different people, there is some varying quality going on. I think that a lot of the essays repeat the same thing, and I think some of them could have been cut, to be honest. I feel like that's the case with anything that has like several authors in it though, but I think that, yeah, there's definitely some varying quality in here. A lot of what's in here does feel very insightful though, and it is an important topic, so I'm very glad that I read it, and I gave it a 3 out of 5 stars. Okay guys, those are all of the books that I've been reading lately. I'd love to know what you guys have been reading, and I will see you soon. Bye!